Yo, what's up? Today I'm going to be going over my sheets that I have for Nefer's teams. First up, I'm going to start off with her hyper teams, where it's mainly just her dealing majority of the damage. Then I'm going to transition into the Hyperbloom and Baizhu teams, where she's the driver in like a solo non-cry unit team. But before we do that, I need to mention about something in my previous video. In my previous video, I said that her signature weapon is around a 20 to 25% increase over her best free-to-play weapon, which remains true. But what I wasn't considering is that Nefer deals so much of her team's personal DPS, so she's doing around 90% of the team's DPS, that increasing her personal DPS by that 20 to 25% is more valuable than, let's say, Flynn's increasing his personal damage by 30% with his signature. So keep that in mind for the rest of this video, that even though that I say that Nefer's signature is only 20 to 25% better than the free-to-play option, it is a bigger actual DPS increase over something like Flynn's or any of the other personal DPS signatures. Are you tired of painstakingly farming for primo gems? Want to make sure you have enough to guarantee that next 5-star character or weapon? Level up your savings with LootBar. Whether you're topping up your Genesis crystals for a quick pull or grabbing a Blessing of the Welkin Moon, LootBar has you covered with incredible discounts. Don't miss out on these deals. Use my link in the description to get started and give your gaming wallet a major boost today. Okay, so here I've listed a bunch of weapons for Nefer with updated calcs from my last video. The big things I want to point out is that I'm assuming Yelan instead of someone like Nahida for my weapon comparisons, because I wasn't sure if the Hydra Wrap from Aino alone would be enough to have consistent blooms for Nefer's charge attacks. So I wanted to make sure by adding Yelan that it would be sufficient. So that's why, even though it may be suboptimal to use Yelan instead of Nahida, I'm using her here just for the weapon calcs. But in my future part of this video, when I go over teams, I will be mentioning like all of the teams that I have. Okay, so now I wanted to mention the tier list for the weapons. So here I have all of the weapons I have listed here, but in percentage form, so you can kind of see what's better than what and by how much percent. So for the baseline, I'm using the non-cry craftable at R5, the Black Marrow Lantern. So this is what I'm using at the 100% base. Then right above that, I have the Widsth True R5. This is basically taking the Widsth off an average of 6 rotations. One rotation where you're getting the EM buff, one rotation where you're getting the attack percent buff, and then one rotation where you're getting the damage bonus buff, and then the other 3 rotations where you're not getting any buffs at all because of the 30-second cooldown. So then all of those added together, then averaged out, it's around like 0.3% better than Black Marrow. So in my mind, you should just use Black Marrow if you have it. Pretty good. Then we have the new weapon coming out next patch, the Froststar R5. This is going to be the new 4-star weapon with a crit damage substat, and then it's going to give 240 EM at R5. This is pretty good. I would recommend this if you do have it, but the main caveat is that it's probably going to be alongside Nefer's weapon on the weapon banner. So if you are pulling on the weapon banner, that you're going to just probably get the signature anyway. I don't know how likely I would be to recommend this. If you do lose the 50-50 trying to get the signature, then I guess you could use it, but personally, I wouldn't use it. If you're just going to go for the signature, get the signature. So then we finally have the signature, 24% better than the base Black Marrow weapon. This is kind of what all my calcs have been coming to. So this is definitively her best weapon when it comes to long duration content like Stygian Onslaught, but there is some stuff that I do need to mention. So going to the bottom below the 100% Black Marrow, we have Black Marrow R1 and 96% of what it's going to do originally. So you're only gaining like 4% from refining Black Marrow, so it's not really that bad. Froststar is very refine heavy. You lose 120 EM if you don't refine Froststar, so that's another caveat. If you don't have it R5, I think it's R4 where it technically takes it over, but if you don't have it R5, it is worse than the free-to-play option. And then Spindlelute, I just wanted to include this because it's the new weapon coming out right now, and then it has an ER base stat, so it makes it so you can pretty much use your burst every rotation. We just got leaks for the particle generation on Nefer's skill. She generates 2 to 3 particles per skill, and then she does 2 skills, so she's either generating 4 or 6 particles a rotation. This is pretty good. The main reason that you're going to really care about this, though, is mainly for Lauma battery, but with Spindlelute, you might be able to burst every rotation, which isn't that negligible. It's around 10k DPS depending on the team. And then here I included this. This is the fake EM buff from Widsth. So I mainly wanted to include this, but with the caveat that this is mainly for like stuff you can rotate. So this is for like lower tier Stygian or stuff that you're going to be resetting for speedrunning. This is essentially the percentage of the base weapon that you're going to get on one rotation if you do proc the EM buff, but that's only if you proc the EM buff. then this falls off afterwards. So I wouldn't really recommend Widsth, but I do want to point out that for the first rotation, it might technically be better than the signature weapon. Oh yeah, just to mention real quick, by the way, I'm assuming Night Sky on Nefer, I'm assuming Lauma on Spindle and then SMS, and then Aino on Forest Regalia with Instructor, and then Yelan on Deepwood with Favonius Warbow. I'm also running Nefer on EM crit. I've tested EM, and I think EM crit is just better. I've gotten it around like 4 to 5% better in my calcs, so make sure you use EM crit. Okay, we can finally get into the team section. So, for the first team that I really want to go over is the Nefer Lauma Aino Yelan team. This team is rocking around 105k DPS, dealing 1.9 mil damage for the whole rotation. Then, I'm running Nefer on C0R1. Actually, no, this is wrong. I'm running Nefer on C0R5 for the new non-cry craftable. Everything here should be the new non-cry craftable. I think I mistyped it a little bit of places. I'm going to go ahead and fix that real quick. Okay, now that I fixed that, I want to go ahead and talk about this. So, I have Nefer on C0R5 with the new Black Marrow Lantern, which is the one that I was using for the 100% base for the weapons. You'll notice that this team DPS here is a little bit different than what I was showcasing in the weapons section. That was just because in my calcs I was doing some slight optimizations and some slight fixes after I finished the weapons section, but everything should be relatively the same. Don't think anything's different. So you can see here that in the Yelan team, Nefer is dealing a majority of the damage. Specifically in all these teams, Nefer's dealing a crazy amount of the team's damage. And then Yelan here isn't really doing that much, but she does have some personal damage. It isn't negligible. But the thing I need to bring up is that the reason I'm using Yelan here is because earlier on in the beta, we were not sure if Aino by herself could consistently keep the bloom core uptime for Nefer. Because of how Nefer's charge attack works and how she like converts blooms into her special blooms, she needs to make sure that she has them. And I wasn't sure if solo Aino would have been enough. So that's why I was testing with Yelan as a secondary hydro slot. We still really aren't sure, but I think more and more that it's okay if you run triple dendro. So this was the first team calc that I had. Pretty good, 105k team DPS, really solid. Nefer is dealing like 90% of the damage here, so buffing Nefer is really valuable. So I want to go ahead and bring up my Yelan sheet and just show you something real quick. So if I go ahead and just completely delete Yelan's DPS here, you can see that I lose Yelan's DPS completely. Then I'm going to go ahead and instead I'm going to just add 250 EM, something similar to what Nahida gives instead. And you can see just adding the 250 EM, my damage already is past what Yelan's doing altogether. So that's kind of a reason why I wouldn't recommend Yelan over Nahida now. If you have someone who's buffing a lot of EM, you can see like EM is a crazy stat multiplier for Nefer. EM will increase her damage more than any other stat, so. Okay, so now that we talked about Yelan and I've kind of given you my reasons for using Yelan, instead of it being for necessarily her personal damage, it's just for application, the same thing will also apply to Xingqiu. So Xingqiu essentially works the same way as Yelan does in this team, but you're not getting the damage bonus and he does a little bit less personal damage in exchange for more hydro application and defensive utility. So a big problem with a lot of Nefer's premium or high investment teams is the defensive utility. The only real character in the game right now that really works well with her for defensive utility specifically is Ineffa. But I'm not going to assume anyone went Ineffa, Lauma, Nefer all in a row just to make this one team. So because of that, Xingqiu is a good option. He's a little bit less personal damage, but the defensive utility does make up for it in case you're fighting something that's more aggressive in Stygian Onslaught or a local legend or anything along those lines, or if you just have like skill issue or anything. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, let's finally start digging into the actual meat and bones of this whole segment. I want to start going over the Nahida teams, but first off, I do want to bring up Aino since we've kind of been talking about hydro characters. I want to bring up the differences between C0, 1, and then C6 Aino. So, wait a second. Okay, I just wanted to address this. I had this as C1. This is supposed to be C6, in case that was confusing anyone. So, just a small little thing. Okay, now that we finally can go over C0 Aino, I want to tell you what she provides at base and why I think she's way more worth using than all of the other hydro characters in the game. So, first off, Aino running Instructor. This isn't necessarily exclusive to Aino, but in this team specifically where she's running triple dendro, she's going to be the only person triggering Bloom, so the Instructor set will be being procced from her, so it's a basically free 120 EM. Then, another thing that's going to happen is she can hold Forest Regalia, the 4-star Sumeru craftable weapon. When you do trigger a reaction, like a Bloom or a Dendro-related reaction, you drop a little seed on the ground, and then when your active character picks it up, they gain another 120 EM. So, two things. She gives 240 elemental mastery, and I think we talked about this earlier, where if I just gave Nefer 250 elemental mastery instead of Yelan's personal damage, that was a crazy buff, right? So that's one of the first things. Another thing is the duration and the cooldown of her elemental burst. So her elemental burst only has a 13.5-second cooldown with a 14-second duration, meaning that you can get away with really, really small and really, really short rotations because of this duration and cooldown. So you're not limited by another Hydro applier like Xingqiu with a 22-second because of Sack Sword, or Yelan with an 18 to 20-second because of her elemental burst. You're only limited by your energy generation and the cooldown being 13.5 seconds, which is like nothing. Okay, so now that I've mentioned all the stuff I need to mention for C0 and base kit Aino, I want to start looking at constellations. So C1 Aino provides your on-fielder an additional 80 elemental mastery. I talked about this earlier. Elemental mastery, very, very important stat for Nefer. So just providing the on-fielder with an 80 elemental mastery, being Nefer, that's a roughly 5% team DPS increase and roughly a 5.5% personal damage increase just from getting C1 when you already are guaranteed C0. So pretty good constellation. Okay, talking about C2, it's really just 2 more applications of Hydro every rotation. It's really not that anything useful. C3 is just 3 burst levels. C4 is another 10 elemental energy refund every 10 seconds. This is actually pretty good for helping with our ER Rex, especially if you are using the 4-star instructor set with Force Regalia, but you don't need it. You can get away with it at C0, so don't really worry about it. C5 is just elemental skill, and then C6. C6 gives you an additional 15% Electrocharge Bloom, Lunar Charge, and Lunar Bloom reaction damage bonus. So essentially she's going to get 15% more lunar damage bonus on her charge attacks. Then if you're in Ascending Clean, which is 2 non-cry characters, which you'll have to be if you're using her with Nefer, then you'll get an additional 20, so it's an additional additive 35% Lunar Bloom damage bonus. So what does that mean, getting Aino C6 and then getting this 35% lunar damage bonus? Well, this is essentially an additive damage bonus that kind of stacks alongside her free-to-play craftable weapon. So this is basically an additional 5 to 6% bonus on top of C1 and an 11% bonus on top of C0. So if I go ahead and do this, you can see that this is a team DPS increase of 11% and then a personal damage increase of around 12%. This is a very strong constellation, and since we were talking earlier how she's dealing majority of her team's DPS, improving her personal DPS by this 5.5% or 12% is a much bigger increase than something for like Flynn's increasing his personal damage by that much. So these are relatively strong and the main reasons why you would use Aino in this team. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, I want to just bring up some of the other Hydro options that you can consider, but stuff that I'm not going to go into mathematically and get in depth with just because I don't believe there's a reason to. So Furina is usable, but you are not going to be doing any of the damage percent added onto the Lunar Bloom talent damage directly, and she's going to make you squishier considering there is really no good sustain in this team other than like C1 Lauma. So really, not really recommended for you to run Furina. Nilou isn't really that good in this team considering what happens to the actual bloom reaction itself. Nefer making it so it can no longer even pop, basically making Bountiful Cores useless. But if you do have C2 Nilou, that is something that could be considerable, especially since she's now available on the selector and your base starting off in Nilou is C1. Getting C2 might not be that hard, which is an additional 35% Hydro and Dendro Shred, which is really considerable and pretty good. But the main reason I didn't do any calcs for it is because it is a C2 5-star character. If you do have her at C2, it is probably the best last slot that you can use, so do consider that. Okay, so I want to start moving into Nahida now, finally, after all that yap. Nahida isn't really doing anything in this team other than the example we showed earlier. Nahida's personal damage is even less negligible than Yelan's, but she is providing the 250 elemental mastery for the on-fielder based off of the highest current teammates' elemental mastery. So if you do give Nefer an additional 250 elemental mastery, it results in like somewhere between a 20% team damage bonus, which is kind of crazy considering all she's doing in this team is literally providing 250 EM. I suppose I should mention, if you do want to run Nahida in this team with Aino and Lauma, and you don't have a healer, you can always run Nahida on Prototype Amber. That is actually not a bad idea, considering her energy cost is very low and it's 100% uptime. You can basically use her as a healer. It's not like amazing, but it is somewhat decent if that's all you have. And I guess I'll talk about Baizhu. I'm not gonna lie, he's just one of those most forgetful characters. Baizhu can give 35% Lunar Bloom damage bonus if he has 50k HP, and he provides a shield and healing. He's pretty good as a sustain, so I definitely wouldn't ignore him, but he is scaling off HP. He's not scaling anything off Elemental Mastery, so he's not going to be able to provide any of the Nodkai Resonance passive. So in exchange of him giving you 35% Lunar Bloom damage bonus, you're going to start losing the damage bonus you would get from the Nodkai Resonance passive. So it's really a matter of, is it worth it? You're basically saying, hey, this guy can give me 35% Lunar Bloom damage bonus, but by doing that, you're saying, I don't want the Nodkai Resonance passive, which could give you up to 36, depending on the characters you have built. So it's just worse than running someone like Nahida, who's already going to give you this 250 EM, then also going to give you her EM scaling Nodkai Resonance passive damage bonus as well. Okay, finally, we're going to talk about Ineffa for the hyper teams. So I honestly don't really think anyone that's going to be watching me is going to have Ineffa, Lauma, and Nefer. But if you do have Ineffa, the team is kind of questionable. It's really hard for me to say right now specifically because I'm not sure how the Lunar Charge uptime is going to be for Lauma and Nefer combined. That's just because Ineffa is doing a hit every 2 seconds, and then you need at least a hit every 5 seconds, proccing Lunar Charge. So you have to change the rotation for this one, so you have to start off with an Aino to Fly Hydro, then you do Ineffa EQ. That'll give you your first Lunar Charge, then she'll do 2 of her coordinated attacks. Then you go into Lauma Tappy, Q, Aino Q, Nefer E3C, E3C, Q. So the main problem here is that you'll probably get your first Lunar Charge at the start of the rotation, and then you might get another one during the end of Nefer's field time, but that's really it. So you're not going to get a lot of Lunar Charges, meaning her personal damage isn't going to be as high as it normally is in the other teams. But because of that, what you can do is instead of running attack, attack, crit, you start running attack, attack, attack for the EM bonus that she gives from her passive, whenever you use your burst. So instead of her dealing damage, you then make it so she gives as much EM to Nefer as you possibly can, and then she has her own personal damage, which isn't horrible. So that's how you want to run Ineffa. It's still iffy. Once she does come out, though, I'll be able to give a more definitive answer. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, Lauma. So, like I said in my previous video, Lauma is the Escoffier to this character. Maybe even more. Maybe Escoffier is the Lauma to Skirk at this point, because of how reliant this character is. I'm going to break us into it easily with a fairly solid team of high investment. This is Nefer, Aino, Nahida, and then Ineffa triple EM. It's not bad, don't get me wrong. 95k team DPS with 73k of Nefer's team DPS. So the main problem here is that you can see from my previous calc that Nefer, Lauma, Aino, and Nefer's doing around 91k DPS. Then in this team, she drops to like 73k DPS. So it is a significant drop in Nefer's personal damage. And like we've been talking about, she's a hyper carry, so she wants to deal the majority of the team's damage. At the end of the day, she is a Dendro Catalyst character. She's not going to be bad because she's a Dendro Catalyst character and she can be a driver. So it's not the end of the world if you don't have Lauma, but you are losing a significant amount of Nefer's personal damage from losing Lauma. Okay, so now that I've kind of slowly lowered you into showcasing how losing Lauma affects her damage, let's get a little bit deeper and talk about Nefer, Aino, Nahida, and Yelan. This is probably going to be the majority of what people have available. People are going to have Ineffa and then Nefer. It's just not going to make sense. If you get Ineffa, you're going to probably go for Flins, and if you're getting Lauma, you're going for Nefer. So that example before is a bit of an unrealistic example, so let's take it a bit more into the realm of reality. Looking at Nefer, Aino, Nahida, Yelan, we drop down again to around 81k DPS. This is around Al-Haytham levels, so it's not bad by any means, but please don't forget, this character is very reliant on Lauma. So 69k personal DPS and then 81k team DPS. Don't get me wrong, this is pretty good. Like, it's still solid, even in today's metric. It's not like Natlin carry level of power creep or Natlin carry level of investment, but it is like semi-mid Fontaine level. Okay, and finally I'm going to go over the actual driver teams we're using: Nefer, Yelan, Nahida, Raiden. Basically a Hyperbloom driver team. So this team, I'm averaging around 20 Hyperblooms from Raiden, and then I had to get rid of all of the other statistics that you get from being an Ascendant Gleam, like the artifact set buffs and the SMS set buffs and all that other stuff. So you get around 80k. This is really rough. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, like, this is a very rough estimate. Like, I have not put a lot of work into this sheet for this one specifically, but this is just kind of telling you that even though you don't have Lauma, you could still use that team and it'd be around similar to the Hyperbloom driver teams. Okay, thanks for watching. Just FYI, all this stuff is subject to change because this video was recorded during version 1 of the beta. I do assume Nefer will be getting nerfed considering how strong she is right now in beta. She looks like she's Mawika level inside of her premium teams, so just keep that in mind when you're watching this video in the future. This is subject to change. I will come out with more stuff in the future talking about how it changed and like what's the current version and stuff like that, so stay tuned. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, don't forget to use my LootBar link